Hi everyone, happy holidays. So from my family to yours, I hope everyone's in good health and good spirits. I just wanted to do a quick video. If you haven't met me before, hopefully our paths have crossed, but if not, I'm Carrie Cooper. I'm a licensed professional counselor and counselor supervisor, and I work primarily with families who have kids that might have come from hard places. So these are kids that might have had disrupted attachment, maybe a rough childhood, maybe some inconsistent caregiving, whatever that looks like for you guys. I just wanted to give you a little extra support this year. Some of you may have had this class before. I've given it before to some agencies, but because of COVID, not doing any live training right now. So I just wanted to make this available for anyone who could benefit from it. And it's just a little bit of a discussion about how kids that come from hard places might need a little extra support around the holidays. And honestly, this year, I think we all could use a little extra support. I don't know about you, but I know for me and my family, the holidays have looked very different this year. And in fact, I'm in quarantine right now because my mom's not in the best of health, and that's where we plan on spending the holidays. So my son and I are quarantined for 2 weeks just to make sure we're safe before we travel. So I know for a lot of us, this holiday is a little more stressful than it might have been in the past. So anyway, so this is just an opportunity to maybe take a break during all the chaos and just give a little bit of thought and maybe some planning about some simple tools and ways we could make the holidays a little better. So I know you don't want to look at me this whole time. And so we're going to switch over to the slides. But again, I wish you nothing but the best. And if there's ever anything I can do to help, my website will be at the end of the training. And again, you can always reach out to me, even if you're not currently receiving services from me. My email's Carrie, Keri, at coopercounselingpractice.com. And if I can be of any support for you, just let me know. Okay, so let's look at the slides. And again, this is nothing fancy. It's just a little opportunity just to have a discussion about the holidays and what this might look like for us. So again, thanks for joining, and it's not just for the holidays. So hopefully this will be helpful for you guys, even for other special events. We've got New Year's right around the corner, but even things like weddings, family reunions, anytime. I tried to make this as general as possible. So anytime there's something special going on for you and your family, this might be some skills and tools that might be helpful for you. So this isn't just a holiday, winter holiday, Christmas, Hanukkah kind of thing. It's really hopefully some tools that can be helpful for you anytime. So I'm gonna assume we all have some shared common knowledge about trauma and brain wiring. If not, there's a little quick video on my website about trauma and brain development, but we will review that a little bit. So if this is review for some of you guys, hang in there. I know you might have heard this over and over. Just hang in there. If this is brand new information to you and it doesn't give enough information, you want more information, just let me know. There's some great websites I can refer you to. Or of course, I'm always available for a consult. So we're going to review that just real quickly. And then we're going to talk about why the holidays are stressful. And honestly, even for kids that have loving, nurturing backgrounds and have never had any kind of disrupted caregiving, the holidays are still stressful. I know when my son, especially when he was younger, there were stressful times that we had to navigate. So we're going to talk about that. Why is that stressful? And if your family doesn't look like the Hallmark commercial, we're going to talk about why that's really an unrealistic, probably expectation. So they wouldn't sell nearly as much items if they showed what the holidays really look like for a lot of us. So we'll talk about why the holidays are a little bit stressful, and then some tools to help support kiddos and some tools to help support you. And then just some real quick examples. So we're going to talk about some different regulating exercises, things that can help kind of calm our brains a little bit during the holidays. And again, there's just a few exercises, but hopefully with all the discussion leading up to that, you can come up with some own ideas that might be helpful for you and your family, because everyone's a little different about what their kids would benefit from. So again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. We could have a whole training, and in fact, I have a whole training on brain and biology. I'm no expert. This is just things I've picked up from different experts in the field. Definitely not something I've created. I have just taken bits and pieces from my own trainings I've received and my own research, and just trying to listen to the experts in the field. And so real quick about brain development and trauma. So as you see on the diagram, our brains develop kind of from the bottom up and in layers. And so if you see that first layer that develops, it's our survival instincts, which makes perfect sense, right? Doesn't really do us any good to know how to do math if we don't know how to breathe. So the very first thing that develops is our survival instincts, our heart rate, breathing. We don't have to stop and think about whether I need to take my next breath. All that happens automatically because of that brain stem, that yellow part you see on the slide, they call it the primitive part. So those things that are just really necessary for our survival. And that's also where fight, flight, and freeze are. And so these are our reactions to scary things. And so, if I'm driving and the person in front of me slams on their brake, I don't want to have to stop and think about, do I need to slam on my brake? Do I not? I just want that automatic reflex that slams on the brake. That's that part of the brain. That's that core part of the brain. And again, that's needed for survival. And then we have this mid-range brain, which is more about memories, motions, and movement. And so, if you're walking in a store and all of a sudden you smell a perfume and it was the perfume your grandmother always wore, then automatically the minute you smell that, you have this image of your grandma and all these memories flood in of your grandma. This is that mid-level brain where memories, emotion, and movement come from. And again, this is really important because, if you think about survival, if you ate oysters one time and you had an allergic reaction and you got hives all over you, well, you really want to remember that so that you don't eat oysters again, right? So this is that memories, emotions, movement. And again, this is the next layer of kind of survival, an important part, but the primitive part, that first part, is going to be the most important, right? And then lastly is our cognitive reasoning rationale. So that's that top part of our brain, the cognitive part, the cortex, where we think about, again, if you want to do a math problem or reasoning. And so, if you want to make a grocery list and you don't want to forget to buy cranberries, you're going to make sure that's on your grocery list. That's that thinking, reasoning part of your brain. You're not going to die without buying the cranberries for the cranberry sauce. And so that's going to be the very last thing to get resources. So if you think about this as resources, when, to use my example of the car stopping short in front, when my foot just automatically hit that brake, all of my resources went to that first part. None of it went to the top part of our brain where we're thinking and reasoning. It just automatically happened. And then afterwards, hopefully it was a near miss, you might notice your heart rate still kind of, heavy, and you're breathing, really quickly. That's all because your body just moved into action. That's what we want our body to do, right? Move into action. So all of our resources, oxygen, blood, it all went to that survival part of our brain. And that's good, right? That's what needs to happen. But what the problem with that is, if you have a quota system for your kiddo where they need to earn 5 tokens to go to the zoo on Friday, which is a great plan. That's a great behavioral modification plan, right? You do good things, you get these chips on Friday, you cash in 5 chips, you get to go to the zoo. It's a perfectly appropriate kind of system to have, except for especially kids who have had trauma, but really any kid who becomes very emotionally upset. So let's say that kid becomes very distraught about something and they're emotional and they're crying and laying it on the floor and kicking, at that point, telling them, you're not going to earn that chip to go to the zoo on Friday. You're very much tapping into that reasoning, cognitive, rational part of their brain. But if they're kicking, yelling, screaming, and bawling, they're at that very primitive part of the brain, and their resources are are being aimed at that part of their brain, not on the rational cognitive. Now, this is true for all of us. If you've ever been in a fight, as adults, if you've been in a fight with your loved one and your partner in life, and you love this person, but in the heat of the moment, in a really intense argument, you start saying some crazy stuff probably. And that's because you're not rational. It's at that point your emotion and your reflexes are kicking in, and you're not tapping into that rational emotional thinking. That's true for all of us. But for kids with trauma, or any of us with trauma, honestly, we tap into that survival part of our brain much more so than the other parts of our brain. And in fact, you can look at brain scans. Bruce Perry and some of the experts in this field, there's pictures of their brains, and you can see the wiring and the development is more so in these primitive survival, flight, fright, freeze parts of their brain, and much less so in these other areas. So with healthy development, what we want for children is, the survival part has to develop, but then we move up and they start learning emotions and movement, and they learn how to walk and they start remembering things, and then they start being rational and cognitive. You can't rationalize with an infant. If an infant's crying because it's hungry, you can't say, well, I need 15 more minutes and then we'll make a bottle. Babies they're still developing in that survival instinct part of their brain. But with kids who have trauma, they don't make that normal progression where those other parts develop over that. They have a disproportionate amount of energy and resources are stuck in that survival part of the brain. But it makes sense. If you think about a child who doesn't know when their parent is going to come back, when they're going to eat next, when a parent's using drugs, they need to focus on survival. Knowing math, being able to pass the reading exam, taking, their ACT, that is not going to help them survive. But being able to notice things in their environment, being able to pick up on, mom gets paid today, so we're probably going to have food in the house. We probably need to hoard food away though, because we know by history the paycheck's not going to wait, it's not going to make it till the 30th. Those survival instincts and being able to pay attention to their environment and help them survive are overdeveloped, and these other places in their brain are underdeveloped. So again, that's kind of a simplistic term about trauma and brain biology, but it's so important we keep this in mind, because a lot of our natural parenting techniques is to tap into that rational cognitive part of their brain. And we may be asking them to tap into something that is underdeveloped and they honestly don't have the ability to. And so again, if you think about my example about slamming on the brake, if you and I are in the car and the car in front of me slams on the brake, and so I slam on my brake, during this time, you start telling me, I'm not wild about the radio station we're listening to. Do you mind if we change it to this other station? I cannot hear you. I can't react to your request, because all I am focusing on is keeping us safe by slamming on the brake and avoiding the near miss. While that makes sense to us, we may be forgetting that in our kids' worlds, if they've experienced trauma, we are trying to rationalize and talk to them about making good choices and taking a deep breath. When they are in that fight, flight, freeze mode, they cannot tap into that resource and hear us. Again, that may be a simplistic, we could talk all day about brain biology and trauma, but hopefully that just gives us some common launching pad for us to have this discussion. And again, we can talk more about it. And maybe in the future, there'll be other videos. There is a really simple one on my website. I don't know if it goes into much more than that, honestly. But there's lots of good trainings out there. So I can give you some resources if that's something that would be helpful. So how do you know if your kids kind of have that overdeveloped survival, flight, fight, freeze part of their brain? Well, pretty much if they came from an environment where caregiving was inconsistent, where their needs were not always met, and they felt fearful, that probably would answers your question right there. They probably do. But these are kind of some behaviors and things you might see. So if you have kids that have a hyper startle reflex, these are the kids that, you're in the kitchen all, making cookies, everything's going well, and you drop a spoon on the floor and it clanks, and you have a kid that just jerks back and, is in crash mode. These are the kids that could be sitting there and you come up behind them and put your hand on their shoulder and they jump or they cringe. Those are kind of some hyper startle reflexes. Emotional dysregulation, that's just a fancy word for they have a real hard time regulating from one emotion to another. So these are kids that either have flat affect, in other words, they just always kind of have the same expression no matter what's going on. It could be the best day, it could be the worst day. Their emotions just seem kind of flat. Or just the other extreme, which is what we get a lot of requests for in therapy because it's a lot harder to manage, is they go from being happy, this is the best day ever, to tragedy, this is the worst day ever, just like that, in the turn of a hand. And a lot of times what you see is that is connected with some kind of trigger with their trauma. So, and like, a kid who hasn't had food consistently, we see this a lot. They haven't had food consistently, and you tell them all you're going to have pizza on Friday night, and then lo and behold, for whatever reason, you can't have pizza that night, and so you pick up a bucket of chicken instead, and this kid just falls out on the floor devastated, and you're like, what the heck? It's pizza or chicken, it's not that big of a deal. But this kid, to that kid, all they heard was what they thought was going to happen, especially tied in with food, is not going to happen. And it seems irrational because, again, we're not tapping into the rational part of their brain. All their brain heard was, we thought this was going to happen, and now it's not. I have no control, and I don't have access to the food I thought I was going to have. And so again, it seems very irrational for us because we're like, you got chicken. It's not like you're going hungry. But it's not rational because they're tapping into that survival part of the brain that all that survival part heard was, we're not having food. And so that's a trigger. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But again, there's emotional regulation where they can't seem to navigate between the different emotions very well. Physical dysregulation. So these are our kids that just are all over the place. They can't sit still. It could be two different things. So we always tend to look at the ones that are the ones that get the most attention. And those are the kids who can't sit still, the bouncers, the ones who are, jumping around and flipping around and stuff. But there's also those kids that don't get out of bed, or they do nothing but lay around or sit cross-legged on the floor for hours at a time. So either of those are not real healthy, but that's emotional dysregulation from physical dysregulation. So they're either hyperactive or they're just shut down and they don't have movement at all. Or they have some psychosomatic illnesses, which is just a fancy term for they have physical ailments that are actually coming from their emotions, not from a physical state. So kids that have chronic stomach aches. And I've seen this in foster care where we had kids who were seeing specialists because we could not figure out what was wrong with them. They kept having stomach aches, and they were changing diets and monitoring all these different things and vitamins and all this. And in the end, it was just that, they were so anxious that their little bodies just, were having some physical ailments due to that. So again, there wasn't anything physically wrong. They were just, stressed. Difficulty with sleeping, eating, or having a calm state. So again, these are our kids who can't sit still. They can't find peace. They'll start an activity, be 2 minutes in, and then, they're off to something else. They either sleep way too much or they can't sleep at all, or it's disrupted sleep. So they'll sleep for an hour and then be up, and then sleep for an hour and then be up. If you've ever spent the night in a hotel where you didn't feel safe, and most of us have at some point, we thought the hotel looked okay on Travelocity and we get there and it's kind of sketchy. But if you've ever slept somewhere where you didn't feel safe, did you sleep well? Did you get a good night's sleep? Probably not. You probably woke up all during the night. You heard every little thing. Well, these are our kids that kind of live in that state. So a lot of times sleep can be difficult. Eating can be difficult. They either overeat, They usually don't undereat unless, again, they have stomach aches from stress. You see kids hoarding food, hiding food. There's all kind of issues with food. I've got some resources about that. So if you're interested, Karen Purvis does a great YouTube free video about eating with kids and why kids coming from a hard place have a hard time with food. So if that's an issue, that might be a resource for you. Just quickly, some common scary places. So I don't know if you know, the #1 place for domestic violence is the kitchen. That's the #1 place where domestic violence occurs. So if you have kids that avoid the kitchen, are fearful in the kitchen, they may not even remember that's why, they may not know that that's why, but that may be why. And, you know, kids that have trauma, that's a wide range of things. So you might have a child who had one scary incident that happened, or you may have a child who's had all kinds of scary things happen to them. But I know for foster care, like I think it's 75% of kids in foster care have been exposed to domestic violence. So if those are your kiddos, then you might know the kitchen might be a little bit of a scary place, a trigger. Again, all kids are different, so it may not be, but just statistically. Bathrooms and bedrooms, obviously those are places where sexual abuse would more likely to occur. It's private spaces where child-on-child violence might have occurred. And so those are the three kind of areas that are, we always want to be very careful about, though, you know, that's not always true. Weird little fact, I have an adoptive dog, well, I have two, but one that's really had some past trauma. You can just tell by some of the behaviors. And she's terrified of the kitchen. To this day, and she's been with me almost 5 years, 6 years, she's timid about coming into the kitchen. And, you know, my background, I knew that the kitchen was a place a lot of times where domestic violence happened. But I was talking to someone from the animal rescue, and they said they see that a lot, where dogs that have come from a rescue situations, that a lot of times they're fearful of the kitchen. So I thought that was interesting. So anyway, trigger responses. So again, we were just talking about that. So if you have a child who seems perfectly comfortable in every other room in the house, but you try to get them to go in the bathroom, they freak out. You might just know, well, then this is a trigger for them. That's just a fancy word for this is a place that reminds them of a scary incident that's happened in the past. And sometimes kids may not even know why. You know, they may not be able to tell you, well, this is what happened. But if you just notice that, and that's one of the things we'll talk about, is kind of just being aware and kind of taking note of those kind of things. But if you see that they feel comfortable in every other part of the house, but freak out when you try to get them to take a shower, that there may be some things about that is scary for them. And again, putting them in a corner and telling, you know, demanding that they tell you why they don't want to take a shower. One is that's fear invoking for them. So they're not going to be able to tap into that rational part of their brain and be able to talk about it. And two, they may not really even know or remember, or it may have been so horrible that they've kind of blocked that out. So it doesn't really matter why, just being aware that there may be points that may be sensitive for them. You know, we've had kids that there were certain foods they refused to eat, and then at some point we find out that, you know, that was a food their abuser always brought home for them. You know, you just never know why things are the way they are, but just being aware that it could be a trigger of some kind. So again, just understanding the why behind that behavior. It builds some compassion, right? Because if we're like, eat green beans, like what is the deal with green beans? Just eat the darn green beans. But if we come into it with a picture that, you know, we don't know what's happened, maybe there's some issue about that. Maybe it's a sensory issue. It reminds them of something. We don't know. That builds more compassion, right? There was a story that used to go around about a guy on the subway whose kids were just raising chaos in the subway car, just getting into other people's stuff and making noise and rambunctious. And finally, someone on the subway said, you know what, you really need to reel your kids in. This is crazy. And the guy said, oh, I'm so sorry. We just found out their mom passed away. And I'm trying to wrap my head around it and try to figure out how to tell them. You know, that's the whole kind of point, right? Because now all of a sudden we have compassion for this family and for these kids, and we give them a little bit of grace. I think that's what this is about let's look at why maybe some of these things happen, because that may make it a little easier for us to build some compassion. That doesn't mean we're going to let kids just run amok and do nothing. So we're going to talk about that. I mean, it doesn't mean kids don't need discipline and consistency and predictability. We're going to talk about that. Okay, so for a minute, take a break. I know I talk super fast. Think about a holiday or special tradition that is for you and your family. And I put this silly picture because I wish I could say our family tradition was some wholesome, like, you know, we watched White Christmas every year or something. But my family, we grew up watching Christmas Vacation. Everyone in my family can quote it, and routinely year round have little sayings that come from this movie. So that's kind of one of our quirky traditions. But think about you and your family. What are some holiday traditions that are special for you? Do you always have a ham dinner? Do you always go to grandma's? Is there a certain cookie you always have to have? Or, you know, do you go to mass on Christmas Eve? You know, what special traditions are just for you and your family? So give that some thought about what that might look like for you. Okay, now let's talk about some stressors and see how that fits in. So do you travel? Is it, you know, do you go to grandma's every year? You know, travel is always stressful. This year, it's extremely stressful. There's a lot of requirements. A lot of people are having to do COVID tests before they travel. They're having to quarantine. So travel is always stressful. It can be even more stressful during the holidays. I don't know about this year. A lot of times travel is a lot more congested. It's a lot more time consuming around the holidays. But just think about that's a stressor for all of us, but especially for kiddos. Do they have to dress up? You know, if you go to mass on Christmas Eve, do they have to wear a frilly dress with lace and stockings? You know, does a boy have to wear a tie? You know, do your family have a formal Christmas party where they have to wear something special? Do you have Christmas photos where everyone has to be matchy-matchy? Is there some dressing up that has to be done that might be uncomfortable or unusual for them? Are they going to be eating different foods? You know, it's a lot easier to make those accommodations when you're at home, but when you're traveling or at someone else's house or you're eating out, sometimes that's a little bit different. You know, if you have a kiddo who's, you know, always had tamales on Christmas Eve, and now all of a sudden he's having ham dinner on Christmas Eve, well, that's a very different experience for them. We assume that everyone celebrates the holidays the same way we do, and that's not necessarily true. And so are they going to be eating different foods? Are they going to be around unknown people? Strangers can be very scary, and you have to remember they're not strangers to you. These are your beloved Nana and uncles and aunties. But to these kids, if they don't know them, they only see them once a year, they are strangers. Hopefully none of my family will see this, but my own son, a lot of times, because we have some family we would only see once a year, he'd be like, I don't know them. I'd be like, oh yeah, you do. That's Aunt so-and-so. You know, they send you $5 for your birthday. And he'd be like, I don't know them. And we forget kids who only see these people once a year. They're strangers to them. And so be real aware about how that might be stressful for kids, and also those physical boundaries. So let's just talk about that real quick. You know, if you have that auntie that loves to hug everyone, and I'm a hugger, I'm a toucher, and so I relate. But if you have that auntie that loves to hug and kiss all the kids on the cheek or rub their forehead or whatever, and you have a kid that's just gonna really freak them out, you need to give that some thought ahead of time about how that's gonna be handled. We'll talk about making a plan, but it might even mean calling auntie beforehand and just saying, you know, I know you're super excited about meeting our new addition, but, you know, little Johnny isn't wild about people he doesn't know hugging him, and so maybe we can just do a high five this year, and, you know, hopefully over time he'll feel different. So remember that exposure to unknown people. They may not be unknown to you, but they may be unknown. What's the schedule going to be? Are you going to stay up late, have to get up early? You know, the perfect storm is having to get up early to travel with a bunch of unknown people on an airplane. And so you can see how these stressors build, and stressors do build, right? And so, you know, you think about yourself. If you're, doing something new for the first time, like starting a new job, that's going to be stressful. If you're starting a new job in a new city, that's going to be even more stressful. If you're starting a new job in a new city in something you've never done before, that's going to be even more stressful. So stressors compound each other. So think about that for our kiddos. If they're traveling and meeting people they don't know and wearing clothes they wouldn't normally wear, all those stressors compound each other. And staying up late and getting up early. We'll talk about the importance of sleeping and eating later, but for us, again, as adults, we can navigate that a little bit. It's like, yeah, normally I go to bed at 10, but it's the holidays. I haven't seen my relatives. I'm going to stay up till midnight. We're going to pop fireworks at 1, whatever. That's all grand for us. We can navigate that, but for kids, that's a lot harder for them to have that fluctuation. So that can be a trigger or stressful form. Different expectations and rules. So, at your house, if it's fine for the kids to jump on the furniture, but then you're going to Nana's house, and at her house, it's not okay for them to jump on the furniture. Those are different expectations and rules. And again, as adults, we can navigate that. But for kids, that can be a little bit trickier. And there might need to be some discussions about that ahead of time to help them navigate that. And then lastly, our own stress. So again, if we are under duress, then everything that happens with them will be more stressful for us, right? And so, at this point, my son's an adult. If you don't know me personally, he's 20. And so I'm in those easier years. But my stressors now are these 2 little dogs that have, that's now where I'm doing my parenting. And at my house, they have a routine. We walk at certain times. They have certain expectations. But when I travel with them, all of a sudden those expectations have changed. So like if we're staying at a hotel, them barking in the middle of the night is not going to be okay. Whereas at home, it might not be that big of a deal. If I'm under duress, those things are much more stressful for me than they would be if I wasn't under stress. So for example, I had to travel with my dogs. Unfortunately, we had a death in the family. Already incredibly stressful that I had this loss. And then I'm having to travel with 2 dogs. And so I think normally I could have navigated that probably a little better, but because I was already depleted, having them with me and then having them do what dogs do. They bark in the middle of the night. They're in an unknown situation. But I was just exasperated with them. Whereas normally it wouldn't have been any big deal, but I was depleted already. And so any little thing they did just exasperated the situation. And this is true for us in general with your kiddos. So normally, if, Johnny's spilling his milk or refusing to eat the ham, at home, we might could navigate that really well. But if you're traveling, you're tired, maybe you're stressed being with your extended family, then all of a sudden him refusing to eat is much bigger than it would be normally. And we just need to be aware of our own depletion and our own resources because that's going to make a big difference. So what can we do to make this better? So let's look at some real practical skills. So how can we help our kiddos navigate this a little better? So if you remember our brain diagram, when we're activated in our survival, flight, fight, freeze, brain, bottom of the brain, we can't make those rational decisions, right? Well, one way to help make sure our kids can make those good decisions is to help them feel safe so that part of their brain is not activated. And so we use a fancy term for that. It's called felt safety. But it just means, like, again, if I'm driving in the car and we're driving together and you ask me to change the radio station, that can be a perfectly polite conversation. But if I'm in the middle of slamming on the brake, I'm not going to be able to hear you. And so because I don't feel safe, I'm reacting. And so we need our kids to feel safe so they can access that part of their rational thinking part of their brain. And so how can we help them feel safe? So things like offering them a drink, making sure they're not hungry. Hunger is a huge trigger for our kids. And as you know, even for me as an adult sometimes, but especially for kiddos, they're not always body aware. So they might be hungry and not even realize it, hangry, right? And so offering a snack offering a drink so that we know that they're getting their basic needs met, making sure they're rested so that they have more resources to tap into. Do they have a security item, a nightlight? You know, are you traveling somewhere where it's going to be dark and maybe they want a flashlight to go to bed with? You know, do they have a security item? You know, even teenagers have things that help them feel safe. This isn't just a teddy bear for a little kid. It might be, but even for our teenagers, there's things that help them feel safe. They have their favorite music, or they have a journal they write in, or an author that they can get lost in a book when they feel stressed. And so trying to think about what are some things that help them feel safe. And one of the things that can help them feel safe, honestly, is knowledge. So the more they know, the better. So if you're, you know, flying to New Orleans for Christmas, which I'd be jealous of, but you might want to talk to the kids about what, if they've never flown, what that's going to look like. Pull up a video on YouTube of what a plane looks like, what the inside of a plane looks like. Talk to them about the hotel. Pull up pictures on the internet of the hotel. Show them where it's at, what it would look like. The more information, the better. The unknown is scary for most kids. The unknown is scary. So the more you can make known, the better. And the more consistent and predictable you can make things. And I know that's hard around the holidays. We tend to be off our normal schedules. I would really encourage you, you know, if you're going to have one night of, you know, you're going to binge Christmas movies and pop popcorn, you know, that's fine. But in general, maintain that sleeping and eating. Especially for the kiddos. So if they normally get up at 8, eat at noon, eat at 8, noon, and 6, try to eat at 8, noon, and 6, no matter where you're at in the world, no matter how you're celebrating the holidays. If you can, just give them that predictability so that they're not worried about when their next meal is coming. They know what to expect. So as much consistency and predictability and known information as possible. Much more so than, again, if you have kids that have not come from hard places, they might be easier navigating some of this. But for kids who have not, even pictures of relatives, you know, hey, you're going to meet Nana. Here's a picture. Nana likes cake. You know, she always brings, you know, this certain cake. So give them some information so they feel like there's not so many unknowns. And as much choice and control as they can have. So a trigger for a lot of kids, and this is big on discipline and understanding why kids kind of do some of the things they do that drive us crazy, is choice and control. So a lot of kids who have come from trauma had no control and were very powerless in their situation. You can imagine a child who's left home alone for extended periods of time. They never know when their parent's going to be there. They're not sure when the next meal is going to come. They're not sure when that relative is going to use and abuse them. And so they have very little choice and control. And so just the fact of not having choice is a trigger for a lot of our kiddos. You know, so this is the kiddo who is insisting on wearing, you know, a pink tutu and it's 20 below outside. And they're just throwing a conniption fit, insisting that they be able to make that choice. And you're just like, it's 20 below, you can't wear a tutu. But giving them as much control and choice as possible. So they want to wear a pink tutu, awesome. Yes, you can wear the pink tutu, but you're going to need to wear, you know, blue jeans underneath it or whatever that looks like. So giving them as much choice and control. You know, there's ham dinner for Christmas dinner. They're refusing to eat the ham dinner. This might be a time you say, okay, fine, you can eat, you know, the sides. So again, this is not about just giving them control. So, you know, if they don't want to eat dinner and they just want to eat dessert, well, that's not going to be an option. But if they're refusing to eat ham, well, then maybe the option is, well, you can eat the green beans and sweet potatoes and dinner roll, and then you can have dessert. So then they're given some choice and control, but we're not just saying, oh, you can do whatever you want. Oh, you want pumpkin pie for dinner. Well, that's great. You can eat half a pumpkin pie. We're not going to just allow, you know, those kind of things, but giving them some choice. One of the things, you know, I often did with my kiddo was I would make a hot meal, and he could eat that hot meal. And if he didn't want it, he could have a peanut butter and jelly. So I'm not going to make a second meal and I'm not going to just peruse the pantry and figure out something else to make if he doesn't want what I've made for dinner. But he could always make a peanut butter and jelly. And when he was old enough, he made it, you know. So you eat what I'm making, or you eat a peanut butter and jelly. So again, there's some choice and control, but it's not just, oh, you can eat whatever you want. So just some ideas about some choice and control. Some sensory things. So a lot of kids who have experienced trauma, and honestly, I'm seeing a lot of kids in general, have some sensory issues. They're maybe very sensitive to smells or bright lights, or they need a lot of sensory input, or they might get overloaded really easy. A lot of our kids, because again, remember, sensory is kind of that mid-level brain, they might get overloaded really easily. And so, you know, if you walk into a department store and they have bright lights and there's someone ringing the bell and you smell all the perfume samples, you know, that can be really overwhelming. It can be overwhelming for me as an adult. And so just be real aware of that. If you know your kid is really sensitive to loud noises, and you know your family is going to watch the football game on a big screen TV with the volume turned up to where the house rattles, that's fine. That's their tradition to do, but have a plan for what are you going to do with kiddo when that's happening, because you know that's going to be overwhelming for him. And so it may mean taking some headphones or having a place in the house where it's quiet, where you know he can go off to. So just thinking about those sensory things, how that might look, and what they might need to help them feel comfortable. Connection and relationship. And so, you know, if you think about someone you really have a deep connection with and relationship with, you're willing to put up with a lot more stuff than maybe someone you're just casually acquainted with. And that's true with our kiddos. They can navigate life much better when they have those loving relationships and connections. Which, by the way, as a therapist, I wish that was my role, but it's not. That is the honor given to you as their caregiver. You just being their caregiver and loving them, helping them navigate this, that is that nurturing relationship. That is going to be a lifelong gift for them. Which, by the way, we've talked about some biology. Guess how kids develop those upper parts of their brain so that there's not this predominance in this lower part of the brain? Through relationship. So good on you guys. If you're familiar with the ACE study, again, we could do a whole discussion about that, but it's adverse childhood experience. It's research based on the number of kind of traumatic events kids might have been exposed to as a child, and what that looks like long term for them. The new research with ACEs, which is super exciting, is that there's almost a counter to that, because it used to be, so if you had 5, and you know, an ACE score of 8, so 8 highly traumatic events happened before you were 18, then we would say, oh, well, you're at risk for all these horrible things. But the new research says, yes, that may be true, but if you look at the number of relationships, connections, healthy connected relationships these kids have, reduces all these effects of these negative possible outcomes. And so building that connection and relationship. So yes, we want them to meet Nana, we want them to meet aunties and uncles and build those connected relationships. It's just doing it in a way that feels safe to them. And remembering those connections. So during the holidays, it's easy for those natural connections to maybe get disrupted. So, you know, for example, maybe every day before school, you give the child a hug and a high five and you tell them, have a great day, you're amazing, right? Well, now all of a sudden it's the holidays, you're not dropping them off at school. They're not getting that natural connection that was just built into your normal routine. That's actually been disrupted. So we think of the holidays as this great time to connect and nurture each other, but honestly, sometimes it's a struggle and we forget to make those connections because we've got things to bake, presents to buy, places to go, obligations, and we forget about those connections and relationships. And actually having those times to connect will actually improve your child's ability to navigate the holidays. And lastly, having a backup plan. So, you know, if your plan is to go to Disney World and spend all day at the Disney World at the park, and you just can't wait to try all the new foods and ride these big rides and meet characters, and you're super excited about having that time with your family. And then you start thinking about, oh, well, wait a minute, Junior hates loud noises. He doesn't like strangers. He's not patient waiting in line. You might start giving that some thought about, okay, what's some plan B? What happens if at noon, Junior's like, I can't manage this? Do you have a way back to the hotel? You know, if you've got 4 kids and there's one that's not going to navigate things well, that's going to be challenging when that one wants to leave and the others don't want to. So, you know, do you have a plan where maybe one parent can stay at the park with one set of kids and one parent can go back if they need to? Could you all go back at lunch and take a nap and have some downtime and then go back in the evening? You know, have a plan. What would that look like? If you get to Nana's house and Nana has a dog, and you know your little one has some real fears for whatever reasons around dogs, what happens if you get there and he is terrified of this dog? Can you really expect him to spend the night and spend 5 days there, terrified the whole 5 days of Nana's dog? I would guess that would make the trip pretty miserable. So is there a plan B? You know, is there a hotel nearby where you might could just stay at Nana's during the day and go at night? Or I don't know what that would look like for you, but just thinking ahead about what that might look like, because, you know, you really don't want to get stuck at Nana's house with a fearful child. And remember, when that brain's activated out of fear, it cannot access that rational part. So you telling Junior, you know, Junior, Nana's dog's perfect. It wouldn't bite a flea. It's the sweetest little thing ever. You don't need to be fearful. If you'll just, you know, stay here for 5 days, then when we get home, you know, we'll buy you that new game you've been wanting. You are totally tapping into a rational part of the brain on a child who cannot access that part of the brain because they're in that fear reactivity part of the brain. So just keep that in mind. That's kind of the golden motto, right? Don't access that rational part of the brain if they're in that fear part. So some tools, and remember, how do you not make them fearful? Help them feel safe, predictable, consistent, all those things we talked about. So what about you? You know, we talked about how important it is for you to feel good during the holidays, how you need some extra resources to deal with all this that's going around. So you might just think about for you and yourself as you navigate the holidays. And remember, this isn't just about Christmas or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa. This could be a family reunion. It could be a baby shower. You know, any kind of special event has a lot of these similar dynamics, right? So for you, maybe reduce expectations. And so, you know, if every year you've had photos with Santa with matching outfits, formal portraits done at 6 o'clock at night, and you know your little one has some sensory issues and does not like wearing clothes that are scratchy, and they don't like people they don't know. Santa could be one of those people. They don't deal well being out after dark, whatever that may look like, then you might want to reduce your expectations. And it might be, you know what, this year we do families at home. We do our family picture at home in front of the Christmas tree in our pajamas, you know? So you might just look at those expectations about what does that look like for us and how does that fit? How can we make everyone, how can we make this an experience that's still enjoyable for me, but yet takes into account all these other things? And again, balancing the kids' needs with your needs. So, you know, if it's really important for you to have a family picture, then have a family picture. Don't just say, well, Junior doesn't like wearing a suit and he doesn't want to go see Santa, so I guess we just won't have family pictures. If that's important to you, then by all means, have your family pictures. But brainstorm about what that might look like in a way that would make everyone feel safe. And so balance that out. You know, if Junior really, really, really wants to make a gingerbread house, you hate making gingerbread houses, you know, it might be something that you have the neighborhood kid help, teenager help make gingerbread house, or you know, so just think about what are your needs, what are the kids' needs, and what's the balance there. You know, we're not just going to tell Junior, well, no, you're not going to make a gingerbread house, right? There might be a way around that. And if you don't really want to do it, you know, you find someone who does really like. You might have the neighbor down the street who loves baking and would love to make gingerbread houses. So balance those needs. Make sure you're getting your needs met, and just balancing that out. So, you know, it's not all about what Junior wants. There's also the things that are important to you. And prioritize those activities that bring you joy. So, you know, if you have an extended family member that has a formal dinner every Christmas Eve and you actually dread that dinner, and you know it's going to be a nightmare for Junior, you don't want to go, you know Junior's not going to do well, this might be the year not to go. Balance those activities and then instead do something that brings you joy. And likewise, if you have something that you really are super excited about, but you know Junior can't navigate it, find a way for you to do it without Junior. That's perfectly okay. You don't have to spend 24/7 during the holidays with your child. You can do some activities that bring you joy. So prioritize those activities. So, you know, if your girlfriends are all getting together for a happy hour one night, go. If that's something that's going to bring you joy, then go. Make that a priority. You know, the house will get clean, things will work out. Make that a priority, those things that bring you joy. And just like our kiddos, don't forget about sleeping and eating. Eating's usually not an issue for most of us over the holidays, but you know, you can't live on eggnog and cookies all the time. So really think about, you know, or are you getting some decent food? Are you sleeping? And most of us don't get enough sleep. And so, especially with illnesses going around right now, make sure you're getting some good sleep and good food. A lot of times when there is a meltdown from us as adults, we're tired, we're hungry, we're just depleted emotionally. Most of us can navigate the normal bumps in the road. But when we experience those bumps in the roads and we're tired and we're overwhelmed and we're hungry, it's much harder for us to navigate those things. So trying to get in those things and some physical exercise, taking a brisk walk, even if it's just leaving for 5 minutes and walking around the block, getting some fresh air, doing those things that are those good self-care activities for us. And be aware of our own self-talk and our own triggers. So let's talk about self-talk. So let's say I go to Nana's house with Junior and Junior just acts a fool. He just acts a fool. And in my head, I say, oh my God, and you're supposed to be a licensed foster parent. You took classes to deal with these behaviors and you did a horrible job dealing with those behaviors. What kind of foster parent are you? If you can't manage that, maybe you just shouldn't be a foster parent. If that's our self-talk, if someone told us that, we would be devastated, right? We would be devastated if someone told us that. But we can tell ourselves that. And it feels horrible. What if under those same circumstances, we said, wow, that was a hot mess. Junior was really stressed. And next time we're gonna have to brainstorm a better plan. So that's about Junior stress. And it's about moving forward, how are we gonna do things differently? But there's no blame and there's no you shoulda, coulda, woulda, because that's not helpful now. So what's helpful now is moving forward, we're going to think of a new plan and we're going to handle things a little bit differently. We're not going to beat ourselves up. We're going to give ourselves some grace, knowing that the holidays were stressful. And hopefully you'll hear me now in your head, if you do that, saying, oh yeah, Carrie told us not to beat ourselves up about when things go south, right? Because it's not helpful. So that's some self-talk. So some self-talk about, some positive reframes from that. If that's your go-to, if in your brain, that's kind of what happens. I did the best I could. The holidays are stressful for everyone. Do some self-talk. Normally I do a really good job navigating these stressful things. Do some self-talk about, I'm a great parent. All great parents have moments when things don't go well. So there's some counter self-talk, some positive self-talk. And honestly, if you get overwhelmed and you're like, oh my God, I can't think of one thing to challenge some of this negative talk, if you just Google positive reframes or positive messages to myself, it'll give them to you. There'll be a list there that'll help you challenge that. Is it true? Is it always true? Is there proof of the contrary? So if you say, oh, I'm a horrible parent because Junior acted up at Nana's, ham dinner, then you say, well, is that always true? Is Junior always acting up? Well, no, he just acted up now. Is it true that I'm a horrible parent? Is there proof that I'm not always a horrible parent? Well, yeah, I did, make gingerbread houses with him when I didn't want to. And, I do read to him every night. And, we do have these other loving, nurturing routines. So, okay. So let's challenge those negative thoughts. And then our own triggers. So let's just be real for a minute. Most of us did not have perfect childhoods. If you did, congrats. But most of us have not had perfect lives. We've had parents who divorced, or we've lost people we loved. And the holidays can be times when all that comes up. We may not be where we thought we would be. We may not have met the goals we thought we would meet. We might be under financial duress. Whatever that is for us, we need to recognize we have our own triggers, our own trauma. So let's say you're under financial stress, which a lot of us will be this year. And, Junior is all upset because he didn't get the PS5, which I think that thing's like $500 or something crazy. Anyways, so that's going to be a trigger for us if anything is said about not having enough, or, disappointment about not having that gift. That's going to be a trigger for us because we know we're barely making ends meet, baby. So being aware of our own triggers so that our reactions are not disproportionate. So in other words, if I'm under if I'm not under financial duress and I just thought, Junior didn't need a darn PS5, that's crazy. And he says something about, oh, I didn't get a PS5, we can probably react pretty well and say, well, you know what? We made a decision as a family that was an extravagant gift that's not in our budget. And here's some other great activities we can do. Yeah, we can navigate that just fine. But if you really wanted to buy Junior that PS5 and you couldn't because you can't, because the money's just not there, that's going to be a trigger for you. So then when Junior says, oh, I didn't get a PS5, instead of this very logical, rational part of our brain where we can just say, well, we made a choice not to do that. When we're triggered, we react with that more gut level, primitive part of our brain where it's like, oh my gosh, I got you all this other stuff and you just don't appreciate anything, blah, blah, blah. So that's our own stuff, right? So that's our own trigger. So knowing what your triggers are, or if you feel this gut reflex of just this explosion of energy, then you might stop and think, okay, wait a minute, I am really reacting from a gut primitive level. This is emotional for me. This is triggering something in me. So just being aware of your own triggers, and if you feel an over exaggeration of a reaction, it's probably a trigger of some kind. And if it happens, we're human, give yourself some grace. But you might come back later and just say, the reason I reacted so much when this came up is because I really wanted to do that for you, and financially we just can't. And that brought up frustration and sadness and anger for me. And this is how it presented. And especially if your kid's old enough to process that, if they're 5, you're not going to have an exchange about emotional reactions. But if they're old enough to have that discussion, oh my gosh, what a gift for that kid to acknowledge, what, I reacted from my lower part of my brain because I had all this emotion. And I really didn't react from the top part of my brain. And what just a great dialogue to have with your kiddo, so that you've role modeled for them how we all can sometimes have those reactions from the bottom and not always make choices from the top. So anything. And lastly, give yourself some grace. There are no perfect families. There's no perfect holidays. And if you've watched Christmas Vacation, there's a great line where the dad, who is just, been horrible in in the latter part of the movie, says something to his dad about, how did you navigate the holidays? Like, pretty much, how did you do this? And the grandpa says something about, I had a lot of liquor. So let's just be honest that, families aren't perfect. Holidays aren't perfect. Prioritize those things that bring you joy and making connection. Everything else, just give yourself some grace about. So in your photo, you have a kid picking their nose. You know what? It's family life. Give yourself some grace. At dinner, you have a kid who spills their juice all over the table. You know what? That's okay. 5 years from now, you're not going to remember those things. You're going to remember the connections and the relationships that were made. So give yourself some grace. Don't make perfection the goal, because we'll never meet that. I love the thing, just be good enough. So yeah, I messed things up a couple of times, but it was good enough. Was Christmas perfect? Was Hanukkah perfect? Was Kwanzaa perfect? No, but it was good enough. Was the family reunion perfect? No, but it was good enough. And so if we adjust those expectations, that just to be good enough. So in closing, just some regulating exercise. So we've talked about the importance of building safety. That's the priority. If a child doesn't feel safe, they're never going to be able to access that top part of their brain. There are some other things to augment that. So safety's first. So if the child doesn't feel safe, everything else goes out the window. But we can also do some things to help regulate and move from the bottom up. And so one of those things is what we call passive. So remember, if a kid's upset, or you seeing them starting to build their frustration, telling them, if you calm down, I'll give you $1. They can't rationally do that, right? So it has to be something passive that they don't have to use that top part of the brain. And smell is one of those kind of lower level things. And so this is a simple recipe. You can get it online. This is a cooked one, so this isn't something you could make with kids. There's some uncooked ones where it's just like cornstarch and conditioner, I think. So you can Google recipes. This is a great one because even though it's cooked, so that means unless your kids are teenagers, which by the way, teenagers love this. It's not necessarily a small child activity. Kids love this. It's like Play-Doh, but you use some aromatherapy in it. And so it's scented, and it's just, they're selling this stuff for real high expensive at like therapy workshops and stuff, and all it is the equivalent of Play-Doh, but made with aromatherapy. So anyway, a lot of you probably have this kind of recipe, but yeah, you just cook it and then put a little bit of aromatherapy oil into it, and then it stays soft forever if you just put it in a Ziploc, or one of my agencies, we would put it in glass, like mason jars, and with screw top lids. If you really want to get creative, especially if you have teenagers, I would have them go to somewhere where they have the aromatherapies lined up, the little essential oils. Let them smell a bunch of them and maybe choose a couple. So I know one of the things I always had in my office is I would have at least 2 different flavors, a calming and an energizing. So, for a kiddo who was always kind of slumped over and lethargic and hard to engage, I would put some citrus, like some orange and grapefruit, in their dough. And that was more of an invigorating, energizing, ginger, those kind of smells. And then for kids who were kind of highly anxious, I would have like chamomile or lavender, or kind of those calming scents. But what's interesting is, for kids that are old enough to really talk to you about how they feel, I would have them actually smell different oils and have them tell you what they like and what would feel good to them. Again, this is not a discussion to have when they're in the middle of a meltdown, right? this is something to do when they're totally in a calm state, but then maybe pull out when they're getting anxious or getting upset or getting frustrated. Remember, smell is kind of that mid-level. And again, scents are very powerful. And they're not all the same, just like perfumes. Haven't you ever smelt a perfume that you thought, oh God, that's awful, and then someone else loves it? And so that's that part about, letting kids have their own scent, or letting them mix it, let them do their own scent. But just be aware, you can have a very hyper kid who loves the ginger and, citrus, which is energizing. And so that's a great time to have a discussion about, well, that's great. That's a great one to have when you're fixing to go outside and play. But we need one also that when you're, have too much energy, to help you kind of slow down a little bit. So anyway, so the scented dough is kind of a dual. It could be a great activity when they're in a calm level state, and in a great connection activity for you and them to do together. But it's also one of those calming things that you could pull out, or they could pull out, if they're starting to feel kind of upset. A lot of schools now have like calming corners or the peace room or whatever. And it's pretty much, those kind of sensory activities that a child could, a weighted blanket, a snuggled soft animal, scents, just things they can just feel and touch, and you don't have to talk about those kind of things. So movement, remember we talked about that, is kind of that mid-level brain, helps them move up. And so, for adults, there's a lot of research now about ecotherapy, where you actually do therapy as you walk. Because movement is so helpful in regulating or calming our primitive brain. These are more small kid activities. For older kids, it's pretty easy to say, well, let's just go take a walk, or let's, do some stretches or yoga. There's some great yoga videos for free on YouTube for all age groups. But these are just some fun activities to do with kids. So you see a kid getting a little anxious, you could say, you know what, let's do some starfish jumps. Or let's walk like a gorilla, and you shuffle around. Again, just an easy kind of thing that gets their body moving. And if you think about when you're stressed, you hold in a lot of body tension. This is a great way to kind of give your body the message, you know what, you're safe, you're relaxed, you're in control of your body. Those are all messages that can build a sense of safety for kiddos. So again, if they're totally wound up, you're going to start with just, do you need a drink of water? Just very basic rocking, those kind of things, taking a walk. You're not going to do this kind of activity. So, but, there is a time, like making the Play-Doh together, when kids are in a very even-keeled state. They have a sense of safety. They're very regulated. And this is when you can give them some tools to help them build their toolbox. And so this is an example of a very upper brain thing. So again, we're not going to give them this activity if they're laying on the floor crying, or a teenager's yelling and throwing things at you. You're not going to say, well, let's think about what we're grateful for. But if a kid's in a calm state, this is a great time to tap into that and do some coping skills. This is when you can do those teaching moments, is when they're in that upper part of the brain. And gratitude, by the way, is a great exercise for kids that come from hard places. And you would think that's counterintuitive, because you're thinking, well, they've had a really hard life. But actually identifying things to be grateful for and thankful for is actually a really good regulating thing for our kiddos. And it's a really good mood booster. And so having them think about, what are some things you're thankful for? Let's draw a picture of them. Let's think about them. For older kids, it may be a volunteer activity. One of the things that just not too long ago I was reading about is some research about kids that do volunteer work. And we often think of kids doing volunteer work as these very affluent kids that are working towards Eagle Scout or whatever. But the reality is, our kids that come from hard places can really benefit from identifying what are some things they're grateful for and doing for others. So, again, it's the holiday season. There's lots of opportunities to, stop at the bell ringer and let the kid put $1 in the bucket and then talk about, where that's going to go for is for kids who, this Christmas aren't getting any gifts or whatever. And having those moments of talking about what they're thankful for. But again, these coping skills. So talking about, next time you get really upset, what are some things we can do? That's a great discussion to have when they're in a calm state. Again, when they're in an upset state and reacting, that's not the time to say, well, what are some better choices you can make? Because they can't tap into that at that point. But now that they're in a calm state, we can have those discussions about, things didn't really go real well when we went to Nana's house. So let's talk about when we go visit Nana next time, what are some things we can do to make things go better? It's a great time to make that plan when they're in a calm state. And lastly, don't forget your social support system. And so a lot of times, and I know as a therapist, because I get the cancellations, so I'm calling you out, but I know a lot of times around the holidays, we are so wrapped up in everything going on that we kind of discontinue what are our normal support services. Like we may cancel our psychiatry appointment or we may cancel our therapy for that month. And I get that. It's a time of chaos and a lot of busyness. But I would highly encourage you, along with that consistency and predictability, to keep those appointments. If, Junior has therapy every Wednesday at 4 o'clock, try to maintain those appointments as much as possible. If he's due to see his psychiatrist, go ahead and make that appointment happen. This is not a time to go off meds unless you've discussed that with your psychiatrist and it's a planned thing. In general, this is not a time to make any big changes over the holidays. So keep up those appointments, and not only keep them up, but if the holidays are a trigger, for some of our kids, we know that. We know every holiday they disintegrate. We just know that. If that's going to be an issue for your kiddo, maybe double up, make an extra counseling appointment, or tell the psychiatrist, I may need some as needed meds, because I know every holiday it's really overwhelming. Or if the kid's old enough to have that discussion with Junior. I know every Christmas is really hard for you. Is there anything we can do to make it better for you? Sometimes it's not what we would want, but kids have insight into what they need. And giving them that voice, just acknowledging it sometimes, I think makes it less stressful for kiddos. Just saying, I know it's always going to be hard. I know it's been hard. Is there some things we can do differently? Just acknowledging that could be helpful. If traveling, make sure that you take their meds, take their comfort items, whatever you can do to make things as consistent and predictable as possible. I even had a family one time tell me they took a lamp. Their kiddo had a lamp in their room that every night they use this lamp. And when they asked them, and they honestly didn't know what a big item that was for that kiddo, but they asked them, we're going to be traveling. Is there anything you want to take with you that would help you feel safe? And they said their lamp. And it was a huge pain, I'm sure, to travel with this lamp. They did it. And they did it because they wanted that child to really know that they were heard. But also that, if that's what makes them feel safe, who are we to say otherwise, right? And so if you're traveling, try to do whatever you can to help them feel safe. And have resources, not for your kiddo, but for you. Do you have a therapist you check in with every now and then? Pre-book an appointment for December and make yourself commit to it and just say, I'm not sure if I'm going to have anything we need to talk about or not, but I'm going to book an appointment and we're going to do a check-in just to make sure that, the holidays I have that extra support. And don't hesitate to reach out if you're a foster parent and you have a case manager or you have a foster parent support group, tap into those resources at adoptive parent. There's support groups for that. For kinship providers, whatever your situation is, don't hesitate to reach out for those. And even with COVID, there's lots of online support groups, lots of online resources. So don't do that. So don't hesitate to do that. And lastly, plan some social opportunities for yourself individually without your kiddo, whatever that might look like. You know, if you love to craft, you know, book an afternoon at one of those painting studios for just yourself. You know, if you love to bake, plan a babysitter for Junior and plan 2 hours for you to bake with your favorite music on in the background. Plan something for you that's just for you. Have lunch with a girlfriend, you know, have date night with your spouse, whatever that looks like. Plan that special activity for yourself to nurture yourself. Because remember, it's like those airline things, right? That you have to put on your mask before you can help. You have to take care of you before you can take care of anyone else. So make sure you do that. So thanks for attending. I know I talked super fast, and I hope it's helpful. It's just a little brief, you know, check-in just to encourage you to keep calm and remember perfection's not our goal, just good enough. And I wish you nothing but the best for your holiday season and for whatever special event you might have coming up in the future. And if I can be of any support for you, just let me know. So I'm going to end this. So thanks so much for coming and happy holidays.